I'm Greg Foss. I'm head of threat research and global security operations at Logarithm, and very interested in blockchain technologies.
Good to have this conversation with you, Greg, and I want to talk about the hackathons that you do, and so can you give a little bit of a rundown of how one of those hackathons takes place?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, like capture the flag frameworks and hackathons or something, been working on for a long time. But now with diving into blockchain technologies, we kind of took a spin on that now with building called it a capture the coin competition, where basically the goal is to see if people can exploit smart contracts, steal cryptocurrencies, and use some of these real attacks that we're seeing happen on the internet in a more kind of controlled manner, in a way that we can watch it and see how they're doing it and understand, just as a means to kind of learn and see, what are some of the things that could affect these smart contract specific technologies, and what that means for the industry. Going forward, people using this for actual financial transactions and putting things like, today we saw a presentation on selling a house on the blockchain. Stuff like that, if all of a sudden that's open for people to attack directly, like hosts on the internet, that's a very interesting kind of thing, and something that I think we as a security community need to really focus on and understand, so we can start better protecting these kind of technologies going forward.
That's really fascinating. So how many people attend one of these hackathons?
So far, basically, we want to open it up to everyone who wants to come. So basically, the ones we've done, we throw them out on the internet. So basically, anyone who has access to not just our website, but also the entire blockchain that we're choosing to run it on. So in this case, Ethereum, anyone who can access any of those smart contracts, it's essentially fair game to them. So we like having as many people touch it as possible, so we get kind of the best research data out of it.
Okay, so they're not all sitting in one room. You sort of, and then how long does that remain open until it's sort of reaches its closure?
Yeah, so usually we've been leaving these open just until someone actually pops it. Oh. So we like to see, basically put the money out there as the prize for when they actually gain access to this. So it's just something where we like to not really have limits on it. We want it to be as open and reflective of the real industry as possible. We started with closed networks, doing fake, like our own blockchains and stuff like that. And it's fun. It's a good place to test. But I think if you really want to get into the kind of scary stuff, that's why we just decided to throw it out on the actual internet.
Wow, fascinating. So when you stage it in order to initiate the hackathon, do you put known exploits in there that you're aware of, so the vulnerabilities are intentionally placed?
Yeah, exactly.
But they're kept secret.
Yep. And that's kind of the key, right? Is to determine, what is the vulnerability we're trying to have them exploit. Is it a chained vulnerability? Is it something where they have to do this step and this step and this step to do it? And that's kind of the thing we've been playing with, is seeing what is kind of a fair playing field, where it's not too hard, where no one can solve it, but where it's also not too easy, where we throw this out there and within seconds someone's pulled this down, reversed it, and already stolen the money out of it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that balance between, what do we make too easy and what do we make too hard. And that's where those test networks, where we can kind of play with it and fuzz it in our own controlled kind of environment, that's where that really comes into play. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of that before we officially decide to push one. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see how quick some people can hop on these.
Excellent. So are the exploits usually... is it a smart contract, or could it be anything different than that? Or
yeah. So basically, the last one we did, we kind of combined a bunch of different things. So the big prize was a smart contract. So that was the kind of big one. Like if you got that, you were able to steal that money. That's kind of your prize, and that's a big part of it. The other one is distributed applications, where we'll basically have all of these different vulnerabilities that are traditionally web application vulnerabilities within a DApp. To show kind of how traditional web security meshes with the Ethereum development kind of security. Mm-hmm. And that intersection is what I find kind of the most interesting, because a lot of these vulnerabilities, where if you can take over the server, then you have access to the entire wallet that's on that box. and all sorts of other kind of issues in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So we trying to look at all these different avenues of how would you attack, not just a smart contract, but also these distributed applications, maybe the owner of the distributed applications, kind of looking at all these different avenues that we already know attackers are taking in their kind of steps to better their finances, so to speak.
Wow. So these exploits, do you sometimes have multiple layers of exploits, or sometimes deceptive exploits that just lead you into honeypot, and so for someone to really break into your system, do they have to go through a series of steps, or can you describe some scenarios?
Yeah, definitely. Some of them are really easy because we want them to be accessible to everyone. We don't want it to be too hard where people can't even get started with these. We want people to be able to go and say, oh, I found cross-site scripting on this website and I can put like this image from this site into this site or something like that. We'll start with stuff like that, maybe brute forcing a login panel or something like that. But then, it goes all the way from there to, here's a smart contract that's live on the internet. How can you reverse this? Can you tell us key aspects about this smart contract that you would need to pull out of it directly after reversing it to understand? So we try and make these kind of different levels where everyone can kind of get that sense of satisfaction of solving something. But, if you want to really win the money, then you have to put in some work. And that's kind of the methodology we've been playing with. But it's
so who creates these? Who sets up the exploits and the environment for the hackathons?
Yeah, so usually it's just been me and a couple of friends who are interested in this area. The hard part is finding people who know how to develop smart contracts. It's not a very popular skill set yet. And so right now, I have a lot of friends who understand web technologies and building in like exploits into a web application, but taking that and throwing it into a D app and basically merging those technologies, that's the real hard part. And so right now it's basically been me and about one other guy who've just been kind of writing these and playing with them just in our free time. So
great. So when somebody succeeds, well, first of all, they get a prize, or something. Yeah. But then, do you meet them in person, or do you invite them into your secret club and say you have passed the level and you're now, you know what I mean? You can source talented people that way. So what do you do with the talented people you find?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it depends on who solves it, how they solve it, and where they're based. So some people, since we've opened these up on the internet, sometimes we haven't met any of the people who've even broken into this thing. One of my favorites was actually not a Ethereum-based or smart contract-based capture the flag, but it's one we did for Black Hat Asia about 2 years ago. And this one, those guys are good. Like, they immediately found, the CTF we were running wasn't really, in scope. Like, some of the stuff they attacked wasn't really in scope. But they figured out the flaws in the actual application architecture of our scoreboard and stuff like that. And so it was funny, I started going through the logs because the site was slowing down because they were scanning it and stuff. I was like, well, what are these guys doing? And it turns out they'd found all the flaws and were actively taunting me and my team through the logs. And we were watching this come in and we're just like, okay, game on. So we started blocking them off, doing the firewall blocks and stuff. And then immediately from there, they started going through proxies to get back in, and it was like this cat and mouse kind of back and forth sort of thing. And eventually we ended up just blocking them by their user agent string because they kept using the same little Python tool to do all their little attacks. And so once we did that, it was fine. But it was just funny, going back and forth with these guys who just knew, they didn't care about winning the game. They just wanted to break the system for everyone else. So you get a kind of mix, right? Like, we've never had those problems running at any other conference, but there we encountered a different type of skill set where we kind of had to step up our game, and it kind of made it more fun for all of us, actually.
So they find ways of exploiting your system outside of your staged exploits. They find other vulnerabilities that you didn't even know.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was just like, not even real vulnerabilities per se, but it was like abusive functionality within the application. And we're just like, well, they figured, props to them. It's a hacking competition. So, but back to your point about a lot of the people who who win these, we always like when people are willing to do a write-up of it so that we can share this with other people who may be interested in learning, how to do these attacks and how these sort of things work. So those are always my favorite. If someone's like, able to bypass all of our kind of tools and stuff, and then do a full write-up on how they did it, that's like my favorite right there. But everyone's different. We've had some people who just jack the money and are gone, and so.
And sometimes they remain anonymous. Then, if they win the money, you don't necessarily know who they are, huh?
Yeah. A lot of them, because we'll trace the wallets just to see, what they do, and a lot of them go right to shapeshift, move it, and stuff like that. And it's not much money we're putting in there, but still, it's just funny to watch this kind of stuff and see kind of what happens afterwards too. So,
do you think sometimes teams of people are working together behind this?
Yeah, definitely, and we encourage that. So, I think if you work with someone, everyone kind of brings their different skill sets to the table. So we don't restrict it to being just one person or anything like that. We want it to be, hey, if you want to be on a team, that's cool too. So.
Is that then fair competition amongst, or
it's hacking?
Just whoever can get it,
And that's the hard part, because you're doing a competition where there's not necessarily really realistic rules, and you're doing a competition for people who their whole job is breaking rules. So it's hard to put those boundaries in place and have them really be followed. So in general, we just kind of do best effort, but if people are going to do it, then as long as it's not too damaging, then we're completely fine with it. So
okay.
Yeah.
So you have from all over the world. What are some of the most popular areas of the world where people thrive in being hackers, like China, Russia?
Yeah, China, really good. I haven't ever done one like in Russia or anything like that. The only ones we've done are like Singapore, Hong Kong, outside of the United States.
Gotcha. But do you restrict network traffic to certain areas then, or?
We can. We haven't really for most of these, except like the little, like if we do them for like a hack, like a little group or something like that, we'll restrict it and do everything on basically a development network. But for the actual competitions, we've just kind of been leaving them open and only really restrict any IPs that start causing issues. So.
How do you compare yourself to other hackathons that exist? And is there certain really prestigious hackathons, or are there known ones that are highly challenging? Or
yeah, I mean, like the biggest one in our industry would be the DEFCON capture the flag. So that one, I mean, you're getting the best hackers from the entire planet there, and those guys are good. They're like scary good. So that's probably the pinnacle of like some of the best hackers. But there's other conferences that have a lot of really good people too. Like DerbyCon's another good one. The thing we're seeing though is there's not many that are focused on cryptocurrency. I think in the last like year or so, I've seen a couple come out where it's like a capture the flag with specific, blockchain challenges and stuff like that. But I haven't seen anything really just 100% like a blockchain challenge, other than some of the stuff like on Twitter where people will post like an image with a bunch of words that probably make like a private key or something like that, or seed values. And so, right now I think it's such a growing kind of area. We're not seeing people really focused on that just yet.
So what makes the blockchain space unique in the hackathon sense? Is it are the exploits, you said they're centered around basically a smart contract, or so is it going to be like a buffer overflow type thing, or is it going to be sort of a ping attack, or is it going to be what other types of attacks?
That's a good question. So a lot of the attacks we're seeing are simple things like double spends, abuse of functionality in the contract, like modifying the owner of the wallet, just all sorts of things that you can programmatically change and modify on the fly. And so it's very specific to these smart contracts. And that's why I'm big into Ethereum, because I think so much can be built on that in terms of like, the permanence of it. That's also the big challenge that we saw with developing these, because like once we wrote a smart contract and release it, you can't take it back. It's just out there. And so like you have to be very certain with what you put out there, which, double-edged sword. I think it's both fascinating, but it's also like very challenging if you're trying to build something like a capture the flag. Because every time we do this, we can't reuse challenges either, because people already know how to exploit those. So it's kind of like, how often can we do these? How many different ideas can we come up with for how to vary these enough that people can't just like scan them and pull them down and pop them right away? So it's there's a lot of like weird little challenges with it, whereas normal capture the flags, like just looking at web app vulnerabilities and stuff like that, you don't run into those issues. You can go modify things, you have complete control over the server, all these kind of things that, if people start messing with you, like what happened with that one capture the flag, you can go and handle it. Whereas if someone's doing this smart contract, you better hope you just don't have much money tied to it. So it's fascinating, but also scary, I think. So, especially if someone finds maybe a critical 0-day flaw in a smart contract technology. I mean, what if that affected all of the transactions on that chain?
It's not like you can just go fix something on the server, right?
Yeah,
there's no server.
Yeah, exactly. Which is the beauty of it too.
Yeah. So it teaches us how to react in the real world. So if one of these types of hacks actually happened in the real world with a smart contract, how would you describe a way to react to that?
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the type of attack, right? The big ones we're seeing now are these exchange attacks. So a lot of exchanges are being hit with myriad of different attacks. Some of them aren't even direct attacks against the exchange. It may be an attack against a coin that's hosted on the exchange. Like Binance, we just saw a big attack against, I forget the name of the coin, but it essentially resulted in a lot of these people who have auto trading bots set up going out and buying this one coin for like 1,000 times its original value, and then selling it right away for like.
But that's a free game. I mean, that's not even hacking really. That's like an open. That's a legit transaction, is it not?
Yeah, exactly. And it was due to market manipulation on their side. So basically, manipulating the market in this way can cause all these kind of chain reactions down the line.
To instigate volatility, right?
Exactly, exactly.
But it's not illegal, or it's not...
Yeah, I mean, it could be illegal, but I mean, there's no real laws. So it's... Yeah, I mean, like SEC is kind of, trying to stay back a little bit, which I think that's both good and bad too, right? Because of all these things, there's going to be pump and dump schemes. There's going to be people, with the signal groups and stuff like that, where they do coordinated buys and sells and stuff like that. Which, in the stock market, they've tried to rectify that as much as they can, but crypto's so new that it's just this Wild West area, which I don't know. I think that's one of the coolest parts of it, to be honest.
So from all your experience and your learning experience, what would your recommendation be to like a small crypto company that's doing an ICO and issuing their own token as sort of a crowdfunding thing, but they're in the bigger crypto space, they're really just a small player. What do they need to know, or what can they learn from your experience to make their own token that's being presented on a Binance exchange or something like that? How could they make themselves more robust?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think right now there's not many good options for people. There aren't too many companies out there that are doing smart contract auditing and vulnerability assessments and things like that. I think I can think of like a couple. Zeppelin is a really cool company. They also do a capture the flag kind of challenge. And theirs is just open on the internet. It's using the Robston test network, so you can go and do little Ethereum hacks and stuff, and learn how to interact with the blockchain kind of command line and with the JavaScript console and stuff like that. But they're probably the main ones I've seen doing actually pretty solid audits. They've done audits of some pretty big smart contracts as well. So I would look to someone like them to have a cursory review at the very least of your coin, looking at how you're planning to release this thing, what your overall business strategy is. Is this thing actually needed? Is it a coin that's actually going to provide value? Or is it a ICO where you're just gonna do an exit scam or something? And that's the kind of thing now. That's why I don't really invest in too many ICOs, because it's hit or miss, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So an ICO company should really hire a penetration testing company and somebody to do security audits. Do you think that's an emerging space that's going to be growing more and more to provide such security auditing services?
I think so. Right now, there's so many companies that, these big auditing firms like Optiv and stuff like that, where they do traditional kind of assessments. We're starting to see them now branching out into trying to understand blockchain technology. And I think the people who are going to be in the forefront of this are the ones who really understand this technology and understand the security implications of it and have that technical expertise to do actual audits of smart contracts. So yeah, I do think it's going to be a very big business model going forward. And I hope more people in my industry jump on the bandwagon.
Because you would think that a company that issues an ICO that's based on the ECR20 token or would have some trust in the underlying infrastructure, because they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're just trying to borrow from the existing technology to issue their own token. But they might be faced with vulnerabilities despite that, right? Because it's how you construct the smart contract. And so are there things to look out for aside from just hiring an audit company, or is there ways to minimize the burden?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really good resources out there. I forget the site off the top of my head, but there's a site where I think it's maybe diap.io. But basically, they broke down the top 10 major security concerns for ERC20 tokens specifically. And that one's really great to just give you a cursory, like, here's the top 10 risks you should look at if you're developing one of these coins. And that's a great place to go, especially if you don't have funding to, say, hire a firm to come in and audit this, or you haven't started building your coins yet. That's a great place to start. Just go out there and find that information that's available to understand, what are some things I don't want to develop into my smart contract. So that's where I would start.
Excellent. Well, it's great talking to you, Greg. And thanks a lot. Can you tell our audience where to find you and where to look for the next hackathon?
Oh, sure. So basically, you can find me on the Logarithm blog. We're always writing fun stuff there. And so the site we've been running a lot of these challenges on is capturethecoin.io. And so we actually have it running right now for DISCON, if you want to go out and check out some stuff there. But essentially, that's where you can find future kind of releases going forward as well.
So I heard a rumor that DISCON has some hidden vulnerabilities in the website itself. Does anybody know about this? Have you told anybody, or do you just expect it to be found? Because I've looked all through the website, I didn't see anything apparent. What do I need to do? Scrape the HTML source code, or is there a hidden key somewhere? Or
possibly,
maybe.
And the way we did this one, Zach and I talked about it a bit. He wanted it to be kind of a hidden gem sort of thing. So there are clues both physical and on the website, and so there's some hidden stuff out there.
Okay.
That's all I can say.
That's all we can say. All right. Thank you, Greg.
All right. Thank you.